Imagine this. You are an investor looking to put your money into sustainable companies. You check a company's ESG rating from one agency. They give it a solid A rating. Great news, right? But then you check another rating agency for the exact same company at the exact same time, and they give the company a C rating. Wait, what? How can the same company get an A from one agency and a C from another? Welcome to the confusing, controversial, but absolutely critical world of ESG ratings. I am Dr. Shruti Sharma, and today we are going to decode the three major ESG rating providers: MSCI, Sustainalytics, and S&P Global. So you can finally understand what these ratings actually mean, why they are so different, and how to use them in your professional work. If you are an investor, sustainability manager, ESG analyst, or anyone working in this space, this video will save you hours of confusion. So hit that subscribe button because we are diving deep. Before we compare the big three rating agencies, let's quickly establish why ESG ratings matter at all. And the answer is very simple: money and access to capital. 35 trillion in assets under management now considers ESG factors in investment decisions. 98% of institutional investors evaluate ESG when making portfolio choices. Companies with ESG higher ratings enjoy lower cost of capital, better access to sustainable finance, and increased investor interest. But here's the problem that makes today's video so important. ESG rating from different agencies have only 0.30 to 0.66 correlation with each other. To put that in perspective, when you look at a credit rating like your traditional Moody's or S&P credit score, agencies agree 99% of the time. They have a 0.99 correlation. But with ESG rating, we are looking at sometimes just 30% agreement. That's worse than a coin flip in some cases. So you may think, why this massive divergence? There are three main reasons. One is different scope. Agencies measure different issues, ESG issues, differently. The second is different measurement. Even when they look at the same issues, they use different metrics. And the third is different weighting. They prioritize different factors for final score. We are going to unpack all of this today by looking at the methodologies of these three big players in the ESG rating game. Let's start with the heavyweight champion, MSCI ESG rating. MSCI is the largest and most widely used ESG rating provider globally. They cover over 17,000 companies worldwide, and if you are working with SFDR Article 8 or Article 9 funds in Europe, chances are you are already looking at an MSCI data. MSCI uses 7-tier letter grade system, just like a school report card. AAA for the leader, the best in class, AA and A for above average, triple B and double B for below average, triple C for laggard, the worst in the class. Higher is better. Simple enough. But here's what makes MSCI unique. They use an industry relative approach. This means a company is scored against peers in the same sector, not against all companies globally. So an oil and gas company with a AA rating isn't being compared to a software company. It's being compared to other oil and gas companies. And this is crucial to understand because it means an AA rating fossil fuel company could still have massive carbon emissions. They are just managing those risks better than the direct competitors. The 35 key issues framework is one of the key MSCI methodology. 35 key issues are across three pillars of ESG. For example, in the environment pillar, we have climate change, which has carbon emissions, climate vulnerability, product carbon footprint, natural capital, which has biodiversity, raw material sourcing, water stress, pollution and waste, which has e-waste, packaging, toxic emissions. Environmental opportunities, which is clean tech, green building, renewable energy. The social capital of MSCI includes human capital, which is health and safety, labor management, supply chain labor standards, product liability, which has data privacy, product safety, consumer financial protection, stakeholder opposition, which has community relations, controversial sourcing. And then we have governance pillar in MSCI, which includes corporate governance, which has board structure, ownership, pay parity, corporate behavior, which has business ethics, tax transparencies, and so on and so forth. But not all 35 issues matter equally for every company. MSCI applies industry-specific weights. For example, carbon emissions might account for 30% of the final score for an oil company, but only 5% for a software company. Meanwhile, data privacy and cybersecurity might be 25% for tech companies, but barely 5% for manufacturers. This weighting is based on what MSCI determines is financially material, meaning which ESG issues are most likely to impact a company's economic value in that specific industry. MSCI scoring has two components that get combined. The first one is the exposure score. How much ESG risk is the company exposed to based on its business model, geography, and operations? The second is management score. How well is the company managing those risks through policy, program, and practices? Let's say a manufacturing company has high exposure to water stress because their factories are in water-scarce regions. That's a risk they can't eliminate. They need water for production. But if they have invested in water recycling technology, set public reduction targets, and achieved 50% water reuse, the management score improves significantly, offsetting some of that exposure. Now, the final critical component of MSCI, the controversies. If a company is involved in an ESG scandal, think of a data breach or an environmental violation or labor rights abuse, corruption case, MSCI deducts points from their rating. The severity of the deduction depends on the scale and impact of the controversy. A minor violation might drop you one notch, say from AA to A. A major scandal could tank you multiple tiers. So to summarize MSCI, 7-tier letter grade, AAA to CCC, 35 key issues across environmental, social, governance, industry relative scoring, which is you compare with peers, not with everyone. Industry specific weighting, which means material issues get more weight. Exposure plus management scoring plus controversy deductions. So that's MSCI methodology in total. Now let's look at a completely different approach. Our second major player, which is Sustainalytics, owned by Morningstar. They cover about 15,000 companies and are particularly popular with risk-focused investors and impact investment funds. Their risk rating scale is from 0 to 100 plus, right away. Sustainalytics is different because they use a numerical risk score from 0 to 100 plus. And here's the critical part. Lower is better. So 0 to 10 equals negligible risk, which is excellent. 10 to 20, low risk, good. 20 to 30, medium risk, moderate. 30 to 40 high risk, which is concerning, and 40 plus is severe risk, and that's critical. This is the opposite direction of MSCI. With MSCI, higher letters mean better performance. With Sustainalytics, lower number means less risk. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen investors get confused by this. They see a company with Sustainalytics score of 35 and think that's pretty good until they realize that's actually high risk territory. So remember, Sustainalytics measures risk. Low score equal to low unmanaged risk equal to better performance. Now, Sustainalytics has the risk decomposition approach. Sustainalytics' entire methodology is built around what they call risk decomposition. Instead of just scoring performance like MSCI, they break down ESG risk into very specific components. Here's how it works in 3 steps. The step 1 is exposure, which means how exposed is the company to material ESG issues based on their industry, geography, and business model. The second step is management, which is what is the company doing to manage those risks through policy, programs, initiatives, and governance structure. And the third component here is unmanaged risk. Now, this is the final score. It's the portion of ESG risks that remains unmanaged by the company. But here's where Sustainalytics gets really sophisticated. They distinguish between 2 types of risk. Unmanageable risk, which are high risks completely outside a company's control. For example, you are an airline. You cannot eliminate the fact that aviation produces carbon emissions. It's inherent to your business model. You can offset, you can buy carbon credits, you can invest in sustainable aviation fuel. But the core business creates emission. That portion is known as unmanageable risk. Now, the second is the manageable risk. Now, these are risks the company could potentially address through initiatives and programs. Sustainalytics then assesses how much of the manageable risk is managed. Company has effective programs addressing it. Now there's management gap, which is company isn't sufficiently managing it. Now let me give you a concrete example of management gap. A mining company operating in a water scarce region. Now the total exposure score is 50 points, which is high water stress exposure. Now the manageable risk factor is 70%, meaning 30% is unmanageable, which means mining needs water. Now the manageable risk is 35 points, which is 70% of 50. Unmanageable risk 15 points, 30% of 50. Now, if the company has implemented strong water management, the management risk, which is 25 points, company manages 25 out of 35 manageable points. Management gap is 10 points, still unmanaged manageable risk. The final risk score, 15 unmanageable risk, 10 management gap plus 10 management gap equal to 25 points total medium risk category. Now, this methodology is brilliant because it separates what companies can control from what they can't, and then focuses the score on how well they are doing on the controllable parts. Now, there are material ESG issues. Like MSCI, Sustainalytics does not assess companies on every possible ESG topic. They focus on material ESG issues or MEIs, issues that could substantially impact economic value and investor financial risk for that company. Like, for example, a tech company, MEIs might include data privacy and security, human capital management, business ethics, product governance. For a mining companies, MEI could be completely different. For example, MEIs could be community relations, occupational health and safety, biodiversity and land use, waste and hazardous materials. Now, Sustainalytics uses absolute risk assessment methodology. And that's again another key distinction from MSCI. This means a company with a 25-point score in software and a company with a 25-point score in oil and gas both have medium risk. The score is directly comparable across all industry. 1 point of unmanaged risk is the same whether it applies to Google or ExxonMobil. MSCI, remember, scores you relative to peers in your industry. Sustainalytics says risk is risk. We measure the absolute level of unmanaged ESG risk affecting enterprise value. So to summarize Sustainalytics, numerical scale 0 to 100 plus, where lower is better, opposite of MSCI. Risk decomposition methodology, which is exposure, management, and unmanaged risk, distinguishes manageable versus unmanageable risk in a very sophisticated manner, has an absolute risk assessment comparable across all industry sectors, and it focuses on unmanaged material ESG risk affecting the financial value of the company. Now, let's look at the third major player. And finally, we have S&P Global and their Corporate Sustainability Assessment, or CSA as we call. You might still hear people call this the DGSI because the results are used to determine the famous Dow Jones Sustainability Indices. S&P Global assesses about 12,000 companies worldwide with over 3,500 companies actively participating in the annual assessment. S&P Global uses a 0 to 100 percentile score, and like MSCI, higher the better. A score of 75 means the company performs better than 75% of the assessed companies in the industry. This is a relative ranking and not an absolute risk measure like Sustainalytics. S&P also recognizes top performers through their sustainability yearbook with the categories like top 1%, companies within 1% of the industry's best score, which can be minimum score is 60, top 5%, within 5% of industry leaders, minimum score 57, top 10%, within 10% of industry leaders, minimum score 54. Now, the Corporate Sustainability Assessment, which is CSA process of S&P, is very unique. Now, here they use an annual questionnaire approach. Every year, eligible companies receive an industry-specific questionnaire with 100 to 120 questions covering about 1,000 data points. These questions are tailored to 62 different industries, and airlines gets different questions than a bank. Pharmaceutical companies get different questions than a retail chain. The questions cover approximately 23 sustainability topics on average across 3 dimensions: environmental, social, and governance. Now, under the environment dimension, you have climate strategy, operational eco-efficiency, environmental reporting, and biodiversity. Under social, you have labor practices, human capital development, social reporting, stakeholder engagement, and product responsibility. Under governance, you have corporate governance, risk management, codes of conduct, supply chain management, tax strategy. Now, here's the key methodological point. Questions and criteria are weighted by materiality. S&P defines materiality using a double materiality approach. Issues must have both significant impact on society or environment and significant impact on company value drivers and shareholder values. Now, this is actually more aligned with the CSRD approach we covered in my previous videos, where companies must consider both the impact on the world and the world's impact on them. Unlike MSCI, which uses only publicly available data, S&P Global CSA relies heavily on companies' submissions. Companies fill out the detailed questionnaire, providing both quantitative metrics and qualitative explanations. S&P then validates this data using public disclosures and reports. Third-party data sources, media screening, questionnaire cross-checks for consistency. There's one limitation here though. Because the CSA depends on companies' participation, coverage can be incomplete for companies that choose not to participate. However, over 55% of S&P 500 companies now are participating, representing about half of the global market capitalization. The scoring output companies receive several inputs from the CSA. The first is overall CSA score from 0 to 100. Dimension scores for environmental, social, governance separately. Percentile ranking within their industry. Gap analysis showing areas of improvement. And last, potential index eligibility, that is, Dow Jones best in class indices. And crucially, these scores are publicly available on S&P's website and distributed to subscribers via platforms like Capital IQ Pro and Bloomberg's ESG dashboard. This transparency helps investors integrate S&P ESG score into portfolio construction. So to summarize S&P Global Corporate Sustainability Assessment CSA, 0 to 100 percentile score where higher the better. Annual questionnaire with 100 to 120 industry specific questions. 1,000 data points covering environmental, social, governance dimensions. Companies submitted data validated by S&P analyst. Double materiality approach to determining what matters. Result power, Dow Jones sustainability indices and other products. So we have covered a lot, isn't it? Let's bring it all together with a direct comparison so you can see exactly how these three major rating systems differ. MSCI, triple A to triple C, 7 tiers, higher letters equal better performance. Sustainalytics, 0 to 100 plus points, lower score, better, measure of risk. S&P Global, 0 to 100 percentile, higher score equals better performance. Right away, notice Sustainalytics is the odd one out in terms of directions. Always double check which system you're looking at. MSCI is industry relative performance assessment. How well do you manage ESG compared to your sector peers? Sustainalytics has absolute unmanaged risk measurement. How much financially material ESG risks remains unaddressed. S&P Global has a comprehensive sustainability practice evaluation. How robust are your ESG policies and disclosure? Know the rating philosophy. If you want industry comparable insights, which is how does this tech company compare to other tech companies, use MSCI. If you want absolute risk levels, which is this high risk company, period, use Sustainalytics. If you want detailed disclosure quality, use S&P Global. Ask your investor which rating they use. Don't try to optimize for all three. That's resource intensive and may not be necessary. Focus on 1-2 ratings your major investors and stakeholders actually care about. Thank you.